He had a gift for friendship. Writers you admire seem so formidable on first meeting, but Maxine Kuhlman sat and talked about her farm and her horses, and W.S. Merwin showed me his palm tree forest on Maui, and Jim Harrison talked about his cabin in the Upper Peninsula. Gay Talese said he loved to write on the white cardboard dry cleaners put in folded shirts. S.J. Perelman kvetched about editors. Nora Ephron ran into me on Upper Broadway and pointed out the building where Isaac Singer had lived. I met Norman Mailer after his celebrity had faded, and he was a very pleasant, normal guy. And the first time I met David Sedaris, it was like we'd known each other for years. I don't have the gift, having been brought up evangelical, but I've been grateful for people who do, like Ada Louise Huxtable, the architecture critic at the Times, who once found me at a dinner, sitting off in a corner, not knowing how to mingle with strangers, and she sat down and rescued me. I loved her writing, her passion, how she described Lincoln Center as extravagantly commonplace, and the Kennedy Center in Washington as a cross between a concrete candy box and a marble sarcophagus in which the art of architecture lies buried. I'm not interested, thank you. She was an attractive 90-year-old woman, a New Yorker born and bred, and she knew I was from the Midwest, and she launched into talking about prairie architecture and Frank Lloyd Wright and the ranch house, which she loved as iconically American, and had bought one in Marblehead, Massachusetts as a summer house, and put in a swimming pool, and then was reminded of a story about a Massachusetts politician named Endicott Peabody, about whom an opponent said he was the only man to have 4 towns in Massachusetts named for him: Peabody, Athol, Hyannis, and Marblehead. The woman who described one building, I forget which, as, quote, a colossal collection of minimums, end of quote, saw a stranded stranger and stopped to cheer him up. This is what makes New York worth the crowds and the clatter, the possibility of suddenly meeting someone fascinating. I once met the editor Eleanor Gould, the legendary grammarian who was nearly blind, and who recognized my voice and announced she was a fan of my show and loved an Erling Berlin song I'd sung recently, and so I stood in the hallway and sang it to her. What'll I do when you are far away and I am blue? What'll I do? And she complimented me on my good diction. Across the hall from our apartment was our friend Ira, who grew up Jewish in an Italian neighborhood in Brooklyn, learned to mind his manners, did well in school, went to Brooklyn College for $15 a semester, got into law school on a scholarship. Worked in a law firm, hated it, thought about going to grad school to study philosophy, drove cab for a while. The hardest job I ever had, he told me. Went back to lawyering for the Legal Aid Society, defending the indigent, many of them too dumb to succeed at larceny. He took a job as secretary to a judge who needed serious assistance, which gave him the confidence to run for a civil court judgeship. He won and embarked on a long judicial career, winding up a state judge in the Bronx with an office on 151st Street overlooking Yankee Stadium. True to his Brooklyn upbringing, he never passed through its turnstiles, and true to his education, he faithfully served the people of the Bronx and the laws of the state of New York. He loved his wife, Eleanor, Italian food, jazz and blues and classical music, books of history, and he regarded public service as a high calling. A good man, and after he retired, he was ever available to talk. A city that offers friendships with Mr. Plimpton, Ms. Huxtable, and Judge Globerman is a city I can enjoy living in. I said that cheerfulness is a choice, while sometimes it's an obligation. Life can be hard, even brutal sometimes. The phone rings, it's a dear friend sobbing at the other end. I can't go on like this, I can't do anything right, I work so hard and I'm going nowhere, I don't know what to do with myself. He is in despair. The play got thrown on the junk pile. The guy who was going to direct it said it's hopeless, and my friend knows that's the truth. A year is wasted. He apologizes for calling. We haven't seen each other in 3 years, but I was the only one he could call tonight. He's in Edinburgh. He went there to live with his girlfriend, but that's over now. He doesn't know anybody. All he does is write and write and write and write, and it's all for nothing. It's strange to hear a man cry like this. Clearly he's out of practice. He's missing his middle range. It's a lot of gasps and whimpers and some squealing sounds. I'm not a therapist, but you know what to do. You calm him down, tell him he's good and smart and he did the right thing calling you, tell him he needs to take a break, and when he quiets down, you say, "Oh my God, I just let the most humongous fart. I've got to open the window so it doesn't get into the furniture." And he laughs, and that's good. The poor man isn't going to jump into the Firth or Forth thanks to your imaginary fart. A year later, he's back in the States teaching high school. A friend calls who has just taken her beloved dog to a pet hospice, and she knows it's absurd, a pet hospice, but she's in grief, and I tell her the joke about the man who walks in the house with his hands full of dog poop and says, "Look what I almost stepped in," and she laughs. What is a friend for if not to tell an old joke? Fix yourself a cup of ginger tea and decide who should speak at Flossie's funeral. I left Minnesota, the scene of my ambition-driven years, and moved to Manhattan, where I do not want. I live with the woman I love on the 12th floor, high above the struggle for prominence in a parking space, and I amuse myself as a writer. It's a good line of work for me because there's no need to take someone to lunch and try to impress them. You just deliver the goods on paper. An amiable, portable occupation. I carry a notepad with me, and if I wind up sitting in a proctologist's waiting room, I just write. I arrived at 2 instead of 3 for my appointment, and it's no problem. Miss Emily's Enema. A slender fellow is the hose that comes under my skirt, the feeling when the water flows and the intruder hurt, the roaring of a cataract, the fog bank in the room, as if an Arctic glacier cracked and made an awful boom. This visitor unwelcome was, and then withdrew from me, and afterward a pleasant buzz, a lovely vacancy. There is no future in light verse. Nobody wants it particularly, so it's a pure pleasure for the writer. I happened on this line of work by being incompetent at other things, which led me to what I'm doing right now as you watch, a cheerful occupation, especially at my age, when my career has mostly disappeared. Nothing to prove, so I take pleasure in writing a very unnecessary poem. If David Powell could cross the country with babies bundled in a wagon and a milk cow tied on behind, then I can figure out how to make a life in New York. Pennsylvania was too settled and sedate for him. He wanted spaciousness, and he craved the challenge of fording the Missouri at flood tide. And I should be able to get along with the un-Midwestern just as he mingled with the Cheyenne and prospectors. Martha Ann went along with it for his sake, and I'm here because Jenny loves the city, hiking around town, dropping in at the Met and the MoMA, appreciating the eccentric she sees in the park, returning from her daily 6-mile trek exhilarated. And who would deny his lover so much delight day after day? We go to the opera, and for less than we'd pay to fly to Des Moines, we see Verdi's Rigoletto, with the jester singing a great baritone role, the assassin of basso who sings the longest, lowest note in opera, and the audience goes wild. And the jester's daughter, Gilda, in love with the Duke, whom her father hired the assassin to kill, sacrifices her love for him. It's a great evening, probably better than a flight to Des Moines would have been. It's a great city. Some water mains go back to Victorian times, but still somehow work. The subway keeps running, the cops turn out on St. Patrick's Day, the fall marathon is huge. The Macy's Thanksgiving Parade. A couple days after 9/11, crowds gathered by their buildings all over the city and sang America and other patriotic songs. For months after the pandemic hit, New Yorkers remembered at 7 p.m. every night to stand on a balcony or lean out a window and applaud for the hospital workers. On the other hand, they complain about the president coming to town because he ties up traffic for hours. New York is not my home, but I can reside here comfortably if I remember to be cheerful. I come from the land of slow talkers, rural people with a great aptitude for silence, and was brought up not to interrupt. And when I sit down with New Yorkers who talk contrapuntally and centripetally and all at once, I think of intelligent things to say about 10 minutes too late when the conversation has gotten off Buddhism and gone to baseball. I was about to say that some Buddhist monks in Tibet are fans of a song I sang on the radio. Meanwhile, a guy at the end of the table recalls having met the Dalai Lama in New Jersey once. A name drop that blows my anecdote to bits, and my wife says something about perfection, and the Dalai Lama guy's brother mentions having met Don Larson, who pitched the perfect game for the Yanks. And I remember a joke Judy Larson told about Ole and Lena celebrating their 25th anniversary. She slaps him and says, "That's for 25 years of bad sex." And he slaps her and says, "That's for knowing the difference." But the connection to Don is tenuous, and now a half hour has passed. I haven't said a word, and my wife says, "Are you okay?" "Yes, I am." In Minnesota, table talk is like church, thoughtful reflections with meditative silences. And in New York, it's more like a trading floor on Wall Street, so I get a reputation as a dimwit. But it doesn't matter. I can always take the train to 42nd and walk in past the stone lions at the library and up to the reading room and sit among people 1/4 my age who are busy discerning what is true, what is noble and beautiful, the very people I want to associate with. Most of them, I'd guess, are the children or grandchildren of immigrants, so there is motivation here to justify their forebears' enormous sacrifices. I was 20 once myself, but not so serious as they appear to be. My motivation is to justify the heroic efforts to prolong my life. Each year is a gift, not to be wasted on watching trashy movies. I hope these good children know better than I how to have fun. I imagine they're on their way to do research on the far frontiers of science, and I hope maybe they take up ballroom dancing and afterward go out for drinks and tell tasteless jokes. New York used to think it was the center of the world, but that time is gone. The semiconductor revolution took place elsewhere, not here, and avarice shifted to the left coast. The tabloid celeb scene died because there were way too many of them to keep track of. And now the city is simply a collection of neighborhoods where people walk their dogs and admire the facades and look in store windows, and people my age think how much nicer everything is than in the old days when drivers left signs on their dashboards, "No radio in car." I admire the cheerful authority of New Yorkers. They love to be asked for directions. It gives them pleasure to tell you exactly where to go. At the opera, during intermission, I went to the men's room, and a tall woman in a long black coat emerged from a stall and walked out. She smiled at me, having done what she needed to do. In Minnesota, this would have been an international incident. In New York, no big deal. The line at the women's room is a block long. Emerson said New York is a sucked orange, but he didn't spend much time here, and maybe he bought a bad orange, or the traffic and crowds were too much for a Concordian. Maybe his lecture on self-reliance was not well received here. New Yorkers don't talk about it, but they rely on each other. I have often seen people fall on the sidewalk, and within 4 seconds, 5 strangers are there, bending over, "Are you all right?" Twice I was the fallen one. As Tennessee Williams said, I have always depended on the kindness of strangers. New Yorkers may walk fast, but they pay attention and they stop to help if somebody crashes. The cheerful man marvels at it, the great aqueducts that bring water from the Catskills, the rumble of the subway, trains going in all directions. I stand in the front of the first car so I can see ahead down the track, the steel beams racing into the tunnel, the green light of the semaphore. But the real marvel you don't appreciate until it happens to you if you're in trouble. Strangers will come to your side and try to be helpful.